Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Petilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's a million times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petrusky, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man. All with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
And coming in at number 8, we have Stegron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Stegron was originally Dr. Vincent Stegron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around, they all went to sleep, including Stegron. If you're picking your superpower, you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there, you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want, and the state would probably be fine with it.
Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure, and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Since Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these two twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. but because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well. And after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather, they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me."
Number 10 didn't have his priorities straight. I won't deny when I originally wanted to come back to the X-Men, I was more focused on running away. I was behaving recklessly as a result, and eventually it got so bad that the rest of the X-Men called me on it. Embarrassing. Storm ended up challenging me for leadership, and she kicked my butt too, unsurprisingly. I might be a great tactician and a master of trigonometry, but you know, these laser eyes that are really portals to another dimension filled with limitless energy, apparently, have nothing on what my teammate Aurora is capable of. And so I was unable to leave and forced to return to my family, with a lot of my fellow mutants judging me for trying to shirk my responsibilities to my wife and child. Number 9 blasted Wolverine because he dropped a truth bomb. Some might see it that way anyways. I, however, feel like Logan was being very insensitive and disrespectful to Emma and I at the time. Wolverine basically saw Emma Frost and I together following one of Jean's many deaths and harshly judged me. What part of the mourning process is this, he asked us. First of all, he barged in on us, then he started accusing me of not mourning properly? Did I overreact by optic blasting him out of a window? Maybe. I don't know why Logan always has to goad me though. Why can't we just have a calm, reasonable discussion about our feelings? It's almost like he wants me to fight him. Number 8. Reestablish the X-Force. The X-Force is basically a mutant team for when there are missions that don't really fall on brand for the X-Men. Until we had the Hellions, they were kind of like our mutant Suicide Squad, except mostly made up of heroes instead of villains. But these were heroes who weren't afraid of killing when needed. The heroes who were more edgy than the rest of us. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of the X-Force really, but I can recognize when the team is necessary, and I know when we need to use them and when it's time to bring that kill squad back together. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed with me. Some questioned my motives, while others have been known to judge me for ordering other mutants to kill while keeping my own hands clean of these deeds. Although in my opinion, ordering someone to kill makes me just as responsible, and it still greatly weighs on my own conscience, which I think is what many people forget.
Number 7. Slide. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slide, aka Jalome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of the slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf, arf," it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Coming in number 5, we have Typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, signage is super lame. Well, Typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4, the Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals, like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
And coming in number 3, we have Spider-Side, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spider-Side was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history. So any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spider-Side is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2, Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like, maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank, a massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Almost let a little girl die in surgery. In Amazing Spider-Man number 700, Doc Ock switches minds with Spider-Man, sort of. Doc Ock, now in Spider-Man's body, is exposed to all of Peter's memories and experiences, and it definitely has an effect. He decides to become a superhero, calling himself the Superior Spider-Man. However, in the first issue of Superior Spider-Man, it's revealed that a portion of Peter is still residing inside of the body, and it has some control over Doc Ock's actions. So later in Superior Spider-Man number 8, the Superior Spidey finds a device that he can use to get rid of the last bits of Peter Parker that remain in his brain. However, in order to gain access to this device, he first has to perform surgery on a little girl. So this leads to a scene where Ghost Spider-Man is like in the background, basically trying to prevent Doc Ock from doing the surgery, knowing that Doc is going to finish off Peter Parker after he's successful. However, Peter does eventually relent and Doc succeeds in his surgery, but for a moment there it kind of seemed like Pete was ready to let a little girl die so that he could live. Not exactly Spidey's finest hour.
Number 9. Killed MJ. So Peter's track record when it comes to loved ones isn't as bad as someone like Daredevil, but hey, it isn't great either. In alternate universes especially, Spider-Man has caused a lot of harm to those that he's loved, and I mean a lot. And even in the main continuity, his track record isn't so great. In the Marvel Zombies universe, Spider-Man was transformed into a zombie, and as this happened, felt the uncontrollable urge taking over him. He was like, I'm so hungry, I gotta eat people. He tried to tell his loved ones to get away from him, but it was too late, and he ended up not only killing, but full on eating both Mary Jane and his Aunt May. Of course, can we really blame Peter for this one? Not so much. He was a zombie and he wasn't really in control here. But knowing Peter, you can bet he likely reminisced and blamed himself continuously for this for days on end, even while he was a zombie. Because, you know, Peter just loves to blame himself for everything. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick little reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really helps us out at the channel. And thank you if you've already done it.
Number 8. Allowed a kidnapping. In Amazing Spider-Man number 112, we see Spider-Man really worried about Aunt May. She's gone missing after Gwen Stacy gave her a hard time for meddling in Peter's life too much, and he spent most of the previous issue searching for Aunt May. In this issue, we see Spidey has become so distracted, he doesn't even notice this guy getting kidnapped nearby. What's worse, when Pete does notice this guy, who also notices him, he starts the classic Spidey monologue about how helping this poor slob will take hours. Hours he could spend searching for Aunt May. He actually leaves the guy to get kidnapped, saying, maybe someday I'll have the courage to face myself again. Damn, Pete, you could have easily stopped and saved this guy. If that wasn't bad enough, later on it turns out that Aunt May wasn't even missing, she just had a new job. Way to go, Spidey.
Number 7. Used young mutants as weapons. That's a harsh way of putting it. Professor X did a similar thing with all of us, and I guess a part of me was emulating him in a way. Although at least I didn't use a mutant to train other mutants and tell people it was just a danger room as opposed to a sentient being. But anyways, this became a huge controversy when I suggested that New Mutant Oya do what she felt was right when faced with a hard decision. Poor Oya was only 14 years old, and she already felt terrible about the accidental deaths she'd caused when her powers first manifested. So the wording I used there was poor in terms of providing guidance. I truly believed we were almost out of time and Oya was our only hope, despite Wolverine's pleas that he could still make it in time. As a result, Oya killed members of the Hellfire Club and everyone labeled me as someone who molded our young recruits into ruthless killers and dangerous weapons. Number 6. Exploited X-23. When we originally took Laura Kinney in, I wanted to utilize her, but Wolverine disagreed with me. We needed to get the X-Force back together. I needed that team. I went to Wolverine and explained why, and he was all for it. Although he did mention the fact that I was keeping it from Emma, which, yes, I'm not proud of. We needed to come up with a roster as the team had disbanded. I suggested X-23. Laura Kinney had been trained as a killer and she was highly skilled. She was perfect. But Wolverine felt differently, that she didn't have the life experience to make that choice if offered. I probably should have talked to Wolverine earlier about it, but I'd already offered Laura the spot and she'd accepted. I wanted to utilize her, but Wolverine saw it as me using her. Number 5. Cheated on Jean Grey. So originally I was personally all about Jean Grey. She was perfect for me, I thought, but I don't know. Even I have come to see that Emma, might actually be a better fit for me in the long run. Still, with that being said, it was pretty terrible how that whole thing started. Emma and I were having a psychic affair behind Jean's back. What's worse, I also may have had Emma dress up and emulate Jean within our minds. I mean, she was more the one who offered that, but still, she even changed her hair color. Yeah, it was not good. And what's worse, I knew it was wrong and yet I still went along with it. Eventually, Jean found out, telepathically walking in on Emma and I together. Definitely not a moment I'm proud of. Number 4. Almost made the squirrels extinct. This one made the cut? Really? I feel like I was at least a little justified here, but but I guess I could see how this might seem pretty bad, especially as, yes, not all squirrels are evil. During Secret Invasion, however, I was desperate. I wasn't sure we'd make it, and so I had to take some pretty severe action there. The plan I came up with was to use the legacy virus as a template to create basically a squirrel version of that virus, a version that targeted and wiped out squirrels. Now, this worked well, but maybe a little too well, as the squirrel alien race was then kind of at great risk overall because of the virus, which, yeah, I feel kind of bad about that part. Number 3, made out on Jean's grave. I mean, this whole storyline was really a strange one. This happened because Jean's psychic ghost told me that it was okay and basically gave Emma and I her blessing after she died. Jean had apparently learned of an alternate future where everything went haywire because I wasn't fit to lead the X-Men, and hoped that me finding happiness would be a good way to prevent this from coming about. Emma and I could have been a little more tasteful though, perhaps, when it came to the location in which we chose to express our feelings for one another. In retrospect, Jean's grave was probably not a good place for a makeout session. Number 2, killed Professor X. Wow, okay, how can you really blame me for this one? I wasn't even myself at the time, must I remind you? So basically what had happened at this point was the Phoenix Force had returned to Earth during Avengers vs. X-Men. It had taken hold of 5 of us after Tony Stark split it up. Divided, the power was manageable to hold on to, but it also made it easier for the Avengers to defeat us. Slowly, those who were part of the Phoenix 5 were defeated and fell away. I was one of the last people to hold onto the power, which meant, yeah, I kind of flew off the handle, and yeah, I kind of stole that last power from Emma Frost. The professor tried to talk me down and I just was not having it, so I took that power and I killed him. But afterward, I felt really bad about the whole thing, and even agreed that I needed to be basically put under arrest for my crimes. I didn't feel good about that one either, although some may have believed that Professor X had it coming. Number 1, abandon his family. Okay, this is probably in retrospect one of the worst things I've done in the comics. After Jean died, I never thought I'd love again, until I met Madeline Pryor. Maddie was something else, and what's more, she weirdly resembled Jean. Like, we're talking almost identical. For a while, I thought she actually might be the reincarnation of Jean's soul, but then I thought, nah, that's silly. She probably has no relation to Jean whatsoever. We got married, had a son together, everything was going great, then Jean came back from the dead. Or she wasn't really ever dead? Anyways, it's all very confusing. Either way, she was back, that was all that mattered, so I returned to the X-Men, which kinda meant abandoning my wife and son in Alaska. Yeah, Maddie didn't take it too great, especially after she learned she was actually a clone of Jean Grey made by Mr. Sinister for the sole purpose of mating with me. She got pretty evil and ensorcelled my brother to boot, and my leaving was a big motivation for her transformation from innocent bystander to evil sorceress whose powers mirrored and were on a similar scale to Jean's. Number 10, childhood trauma. You might think Peter has some pretty intense childhood trauma himself, and he does, but he's not alone here. MJ also had a rough childhood. She grew up in a home where her family was constantly forced to move because her dad, a professor, always felt the need to take on new jobs and move to new schools. Maybe because he had an anger problem, or as MJ speculated, because he was looking for some kind of satisfaction that he never really could find. This made it hard for MJ to make new friends, but she forced herself to be even more outgoing and charismatic, entertaining her classmates and making everyone fall in love with her. That classic MJ charm. However, what her friends didn't know was at home she and her sister Gail and her mom were suffering. Her father mistreated them and even at one point attacked Gail in front of Mary Jane. Eventually, her mother left her father, but I don't think MJ ever really healed from her trauma, instead choosing to use her love of performing as a creative outlet and a means of escape. Number 9, losing her mom. Not only did Mary Jane have a difficult life growing up, but she also lost her mother at a young age, after her father had disappeared from her life, and right around the time her sister had her husband walk out on her, while she was pregnant with their last child. Oh my goodness. The death of her mom took a toll on MJ and served as a wake-up call. Feeling her mother and her sister had both wasted their lives, giving up on their passions to become mothers, she left her sister, moving in with her Aunt Anna in Brooklyn, and decided to pursue her own dreams of becoming a professional actress. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick little reminder to give that like a little click. It really helps us out on the channel, and thank you so much if you've already done so. Number 8, Killed by Love. This one only ranks lower because it is technically from an alternate future, but it's still pretty terrible. In Spider-Man Reign, Mary Jane dies young after getting cancer, which despite it also being implied with her mom to run in her family in terms of her medical history, it is in this case caused by her closeness to Peter Parker himself, and all his radioactive fluids. In the end, Peter's radioactivity is the one to blame for Mary Jane's death, and she lives on in his memories, haunting him. We also need to acknowledge how unkind, senile old Peter is to ghost memory MJ, because that is also very much a thing in Spider-Man Reign. In typical Peter fashion, he seems to almost take out his own feelings of guilt on her ghost, having more than a few outbursts that are directed at MJ's non-existent self. Number 7. Worst boyfriend ever. I wish I could say this was a one-time instance, but this is one of the worst, most consistent things that we've seen from Peter Parker throughout all of his relationships. He's not only super awkward around the ladies, but also has a tendency to behave badly with his romantic partners as well. For one, Peter very rarely lets people in on his secret of being Spider-Man, which causes a lot of problems early on in relationships that usually end up causing a breakup before things get super serious. And you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, Amanda, hasn't Peter Parker told Mary Jane before that he's Spider-Man? Yes, but she also apparently knew from like day one that he was Spider-Man, so I don't know if that even counts because she knew the whole time. But beyond that, he also says things and does kind of things that are just in general awful. He snapped at his partners, lied to them, gotten them into all kinds of danger, blamed them for things that weren't their fault, and even at times physically hit them. Like when Mary Jane tried to break up a fight between Peter Parker and his clone Ben Reilly, and in a mindless rage he slammed her back, causing her to go flying into a wall. Also, Spider-Man is super strong, so even if he like flicked Mary Jane, I imagine that would be terribly painful. Oh, and she was also pregnant at the time with their child, which just makes it even worse.
Number 6. He almost robbed a jewelry store. Okay, I know this isn't supposed to be top 10 things Spider-Man almost did, but I have to mention another really weird out of character Spider-Man moment. In Amazing Spider-Man number 87, Spidey has been suffering from an illness that he determines to be the radioactivity in his blood slowly killing him. He's been feeling delirious for a while and having a hard time using his powers properly, and he's swinging around the city, monologuing, wondering what it means for his future. Suddenly, he remembers it's Gwen Stacy's birthday, classic Peter, and he doesn't have a gift. So in a bizarre moment, we see Spider-Man randomly decide to break into a jewelry store and he steals a necklace for her. He realizes what he's doing before it's too late and he kind of like puts it back, but he's already caused property damage and like, you know, thank God they don't have cameras because Jameson would just have a field day with that. The whole thing is just a really weird moment. Spider-Man starting to wonder if he's losing his mind. And the whole thing was really surprising to me, and he almost went through with it.
Number 5, killed MJ. Again! Yeah, for someone who claims to love her so much, Peter is not very good at treating MJ well. This one comes to us from another alternate reality though, so we do have to, you know, asterisk and add that in there, little editor note. Because of course, Peter would never kill Mary Jane in the main continuity, or more, he just hasn't done so yet. In the reality of Spider-Man Reign, we're taken to a potential future reality where Peter killed Mary Jane simply by loving her. Their being intimate, at least that's what's implied, caused Mary Jane to be exposed to Peter's radioactivity at a level where she ended up getting cancer and dying. His radioactive fluids. Yeah, that's pretty intense. In typical Peter fashion, this becomes one of his greatest regrets, giving MJ cancer, and only serves to basically drive him insane and turn him senile, which really doesn't help anyone and makes for a pretty crazy story when he returns as a bizarre and depressed version of Old Man Spider-Man. Old Man Spider-Man is super depressing.
Number 4. Worked for the Jackal. The whole clone saga was definitely one of Spidey's lowest points, especially just the way that they totally messed with Peter's character throughout the whole thing. He was calling himself the Spider and just acting generally unpleasant, but when he found out that he wasn't the real Peter Parker but a clone, he really didn't receive that news very well. The Jackal somehow ends up convincing Pete to work with him, and somehow Peter buys it. even though it means working against his friend Ben Reilly. Peter eventually does come to his senses, but man, how could he have ever been convinced to work with a supervillain in the first place? You know, every time I look back on this era, I remember why people hate it so much. Both versions of Spider-Man are pretty decent, but the way that they're pitted against one another as if there can only be one and everything, the whole thing just felt kind of forced.
Number 3 was too apathetic. Spider-Man's apathy is something that haunts him to this day and makes him pretty much the one to blame for his Uncle Ben's death. Well, I mean, I personally think Peter is much too hard on himself here, and that being that harsh only leads to more disasters later down the road that his intense sense of responsibility has a hand in causing, but I digress. Peter for sure thinks this is the worst thing he has ever done, allowing the man who would go on to kill his uncle to get past him. At the time when the guard who pursued the criminal asked for help, Peter simply didn't see the point in aiding. That wasn't his job, he thought. He wasn't a hero. However, afterward he learned that with great power comes great responsibility, a lesson that has haunted him and continues to both haunt and inspire him to this day.
Number 2. He killed Charlemagne. In the one-shot Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987, we get to witness an epic showdown between these two fan favorites. Peter winds up in Germany investigating a mysterious arms dealer. Charlemagne turns out to be an old associate of Wolverine's, and she's got all kinds of people after her. They track her to East Berlin, where Wolverine plans to kill her, sparing her from being tortured by the KGB. Spider-Man isn't really cool with the whole killing her part of the plan, so the two of them have a bit of a fight about it. However, after a helicopter breaks up the fight for a second, Peter's spidey sense kicks in, and thinking that Wolverine is behind him, he turns around and delivers a full-powered punch, instantly killing Charlemagne. It's implied that she probably intended for this to happen as she was wanting to die and stuff, but still, if you had told me that Spider-Man once punched a woman with no superpowers and killed her in one hit, I'd be a little skeptical. But it really happened.
Number 1, probably killed Gwen Stacy. Once again, Peter is causing harm to those he loves. What's more, this whole moment where he attempted to save Gwen and we hear her neck snap is made even worse for Peter in terms of his own guilt over the situation by the fact that he never really knows if it was him or if it was Green Goblin who is to blame for her death. Was she dead before he grabbed her, or did she die when his webbing latched on to save her, breaking her neck? We still don't really know for sure, although I think Green Goblin claims that she died while she was falling. He's like, a fall like that, she died before she hits the ground. And I'm like, wait, is that how falling works? It's not. Anyways. I mean, either way, Peter Parker is kind of to blame here, as Green Goblin has a tendency to target those that Spider-Man loves. So once again, just loving Gwen was in a way a terrible thing for him to do to her.
Number 10. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers, and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Number 9. Got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. That it's like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 8. got beaten to near death by the Phoenix 4. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler.
Number 7. Suffered Peter Parker's hostility. There are multiple times that Mary Jane has suffered being emotionally mistreated by Peter, but this moment in retrospect for me is one of the worst. Just after Gwen died, Peter was caught tearfully mourning her by MJ, who had been waiting in Harry and Pete's apartment. She was in a lot of pain at the time, having just heard of Gwen's death and mourning her basically best friend, Gwen, herself. Peter, however, did not want to hear it and insisted his pain was actually greater than hers, and that she couldn't possibly understand how hurt he was. Wow, what a cruel and immature way to respond. Like, I know Peter was hurting, but ouch! MJ did not deserve this. He also goes on to say, "Don't make me laugh, Mary Jane. You wouldn't be sorry if your own mother died." Whew. This stings quite a bit given what we now know of MJ's past, that Mary Jane's mother did die, and that it was extremely painful for her. Granted, Peter might not have known this yet, in fact I'm pretty sure he didn't in terms of continuity, but still, ouch! I'm sure when he found out about that later, he thought back to those words and was like, oh, I was pretty terrible, that was bad. I hope he apologized to her later. Number 6. Fan hate. The fan hate that we see by some is actually seen as being created somewhat by Marvel's hate for her character, depending on who we talk to. So what's really going on here? Why do people hate MJ? Well, there are Spider-Man fans who blame Mary Jane almost exclusively for Gwen's death. Not like a conspiracy theory like, Mary Jane was secretly the Green Goblin or anything weird like that. It's more just that MJ basically caused Gwen to be killed because writers wanted MJ and Peter to be together, and many fans actually would have rather that he stayed with Gwen, who they think is a more suitable fit. So the way they see it, if MJ wasn't around, Gwen would still be around today. Then there are those who criticize her fancy-free lifestyle and just how she's kinda all about having fun. People didn't think that she was serious enough, though really with the context of her history, it's kinda hard to see how people felt this was a problem. That's kinda just part of Mary Jane's characterization, and it makes sense if you know her history. Then there are those who feel she simply isn't well enough written, that she's basically an underdeveloped character without really much depth. Regardless, there is a lot of hate that gets thrown MJ's way that I think in most cases is very undeserved. Let me know what you folks think of this hate in the comments. Number 5. Had her marriage retconned. While this is pretty bad, her relationship with Peter Parker hasn't been all that great, which is why I'm ranking this one so low. Given all that MJ has gone through during her marriage, it might be better honestly if it never happened. Although I'm sure Mary Jane's love of Peter would prevent her from ever agreeing with me. Because yeah, that love is pretty strong, Tiger. Mary Jane and Peter's marriage was the price that Spider-Man was asked to pay Mephisto in exchange for his help in saving Aunt May's life. Rather than let his elderly Aunt May pass away, Peter agreed. Which is pretty crazy considering, Aunt May's really old, so you could've just maybe let her go, but I guess not. And if you're wondering why he didn't ask other people for help here, who are superheroes, magic users, scientists, and or doctors, there's some people I'm sure that are all of those things, he actually did ask them for help, and apparently no one else could help him. This was a truly terrible comics moment, but it happened and it resulted in Peter's and Mary Jane's lives forever being changed. Number 4. Thought dead, then kidnapped. Mary Jane was on a flight to a shoot when the plane exploded and she was presumed dead. For over a year in comics, MJ was simply a ghost, haunting Peter, who truly believed that she was actually gone. In reality, Mary Jane had been kidnapped by a mutant stalker who was obsessed with her and with becoming Spider-Man himself, known only as Stalker. It was revealed that this villain was a mutant who planned to use their telepathic powers to, in essence, become Peter and take over his life. Mary Jane was kept locked away and kidnapped by this villain for months before Spider-Man finally came to rescue her. In the end, she and Peter got away after she managed to knock out her captor using a chair to basically hit Spidey, which, because Stalker was psychically linked to him, hurt him more than it did Peter, who obviously is much more resilient, I'm sure, than Stalker. The whole thing, I feel like, should have really taken more of a toll on just about everyone involved, but hey, comics, so I feel like we never really talk about it again. Number 3, terrorized by Venom. One of the moments that caused a lot of grief and trauma for MJ took place when she was completely terrified by Venom's appearance and presence. Not only was MJ left almost broken by the experience, almost perpetually and severely afraid of the villain, but this wouldn't be the last that she'd see of Venom either. Venom has not only terrified MJ in the main continuity, but he has also done so in alternate universes too, where he has targeted both her and other members of Peter's and generally also MJ's family together. Due to her intensely negative relationship with the symbiote, fans even were initially triggered at the sight of the black suit when we were given a variant cover featuring MJ bonded with the symbiote in place of Eddie Brock. This was intended to celebrate MJ, but it definitely stirred up some mixed feelings for many of her fans. Although it is a cool variant, it does look cool, I will say. Number 2, assassination attempts. We all talk about when Peter hit Mary Jane in the midst of a fight between him and Ben, but few people seem to recall that Peter also tried to kill Mary Jane during the events of the Clone Saga. So it wasn't necessarily his fault here, as he was programmed, brainwashed into doing so by the Jackal, but it still makes for a horrific experience for Mary Jane either way, who at the time was also pregnant with their child. Terrified, she was forced to flee from Peter, running for her life and seeking help from anyone she could find, any of Spider-Man's hopefully superpowered allies. Basically, the Clone Saga was just a really hard time for MJ and pretty much everyone else. It was just a hard time. Number 1, baby was taken. One of the worst things to ever happen to MJ was when she was tricked into believing that her and Peter's baby was born stillborn. Mary Jane had a complicated and challenging pregnancy, and it was even implied that her baby would be born with powers, or develop them over time, possibly even being born a mutant. While out at a restaurant, Allison Mongrain, working for Norman Osborn, slipped something into Mary Jane's food, which resulted in her going into labor. She was then told the baby that she gave birth to was actually stillborn, when in reality the baby was not dead but lived and was kidnapped by Mongrain and delivered to Osborn, who paid her to take the baby away to Europe, never to be seen or heard from again. It's later suggested the child perished, but there isn't really much explanation as to why Osborn did this, especially so secretly, without MJ and Peter really ever learning of what truly happened till much later. It more feels like this was part of an unresolved plot that someone was writing, and the writers just really didn't want the young couple to start a family, so they were like, I guess we'll just leave this, and their baby's gone. The end.
Number 10, drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are two things you never want to happen to you, in that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. Worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron, so it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's alright, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. Damn you, Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said damn you to you, you'd be like, oh, please. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, you can kill Aunt May, you've earned it.
You earned a pardon.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it, here you go.
Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man. Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate in fact that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through. Number 5. Became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has got to be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe. Number 4. Killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people, but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up. Number 3. Became one of the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his horsemen of the apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour. Number 2. Been the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity, and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, devourer of totems, on a mission to destroy all spider-folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims' tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other spider totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the spider army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it. Yeesh.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by Craven. In the storyline Craven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So Craven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with his plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So Craven buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, Craven's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted Craven, Craven was like, "No way buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And Craven releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Craven intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. Clones. The Clone Saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The Clone Saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and the Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up this story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You get what you got. Number 7, impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal, and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6, he loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour, I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. If you look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event, this was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, to have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. Like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
Yeah. You made a delicious sandwich. So did you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion. And police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times, it's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. And Gath's barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne The Rock Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1, Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out, and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw, in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last-minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. Number 10, One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man The Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8. Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. And coming up at number 7, Hit by a Train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he's seeing is real, but what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again. You love to see it, we also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new, not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. More girl problems. Peter in his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right? Physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. You gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4. The Deal with the Devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison. But still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. And instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, so everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is a plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing, you got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mix it DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, number 1, he gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learned a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah. That's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great.